Okay, welcome to episode 8 of Adjacent Pod. Really excited to be back. We've had a lot of travel. I'm sorry about the kind of the missed weeks, but we're going strong. We got 3 more episodes in the season, and we're pretty excited about what's going on. We got a real special for episode 10. Before I get going, I got to thank our sponsors. Thank you to Treeline Veterinary Cancer Care for pets in a boutique setting. Thank you to Lalchandani Simon, a boutique technology and healthcare firm. And thank you for all the people who've subscribed, rated, and signed up. It's incredible how quickly this is going, and we're very grateful. You know, we thought about this idea of talking about things adjacent to crypto, and it turns out we were onto something because a lot of people have been signing up and watching, and we really appreciate all your efforts to share our videos. So today is an amazing episode, and I will tell you one of the reasons it's amazing. I find that when I have guests on that I have known for a long time, it's just that much more fun, that much more exciting, and for me, it's very special. I'm definitely one of those people who really values long-term relationships. I get excited when I bump into somebody that I knew in high school or college, law school, when I was clerking, and so it's very exciting for me to bring on guests that I've known for quite a bit of time, and we have a long relationship, and we have a lot of history together. So imagine what happens when blockchain meets business meets art. You know, last week we talked to Dan Carr about what an NFT is. We talked about his platform. We learned a little bit about the roller coaster ride of NFTs. Today we're going to talk specifically about digital art, in addition to my guest's background and everything he's done in this space, as well as all the other areas that he's involved in. My guest today is Vivek Jayaram, founder of Jayaram Law. Vivek and I have an awesome story. We met when we both clerked in the Southern District of Florida in 2004 to 5, and it's kind of awesome to follow his career and follow my career because it's kind of this weaving line that is kind of crisscrossed at different times. I remember, you know, when I left law and I went into the restaurant business for a while, and we needed to get a trademark.
That's right.
Vivek had, you remember that? Well, I'll bring you on in a second here.
I had forgotten about it, but now I'm remembering it. Yeah.
Vivek had just started his law firm, and he had focused in IP law and doing a lot of trademark stuff. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know how to go through the application process. So I remember sitting in the office below one of our restaurants and calling him or looking at his emails and saying, here's how you do it. So that's kind of the first crisscross. And then I remember when we were starting our firm that, you know, I think I reached out to Vivek to say, hey, how do I do this? What do I do? And all the things that go with it. And he was very eager to help me. Is kind of a true testament to our friendship and how long we've known each other and how similar our backgrounds are. And, you know, it's evolved so much that we've now co-counseled stuff together.
Yeah.
You know, we just closed out a case in Chicago about 6 months ago that I can say was a massive victory for our mutual client. And just so you don't think it's all law and business, in a past life, I ran for office, and Vivek had a sign in front of his house saying, vote for Cubs. And that's how much our lives have intercrossed. And so I'm super excited to welcome Vivek Jayaram to Adjacent Pod.
All right. How you doing, Cubs? Great to be here.
Great to have you here, man. I love seeing you. Where do we find you right now?
I am in Miami Beach, where I have been for a long time now.
You know, I know, and we're going to talk about this a little later. Like, tell me, you have a law firm that kind of spans multiple location. So how do you formulate that into your life? Are you constantly on a plane? And I know there's a French aspect to your life and your family's life. So give us a little rendition of like what your life looks like right now.
Yeah. So I moved down to Miami Beach from New York 21 years ago. I don't think I had ever been to Miami, Cubs. I knew very little about it, but somewhere between the second and third year of law school, I decided I wanted to clerk for a judge, and I went to Cardozo, right? So I knew it was going to be probably a little bit of a challenge. So I applied like everywhere, and one of those places I applied was Miami. And so I came down here for an interview, to interview with Judge Jordan, who is a fantastic guy. He was sitting on the district court back then. I think he had been appointed.
Now an appellate court clerk, right?
Now he's on the 11th
appellate court judge, excuse me.
Right, now in the 11th Circuit. And that was it. I came down for the interview. I actually took the bus, the Miami bus from the airport to the courthouse. And when I got into the interview, he said, "Oh, how was your ride over here?" I said, "Oh, it was great. I took the bus." He's like, "I've lived here my whole life. I've never taken the bus. I've never taken the bus once."
And just for those of you who are thinking about visiting Miami, please do not follow in Vivek's footsteps.
Nobody takes the
they
bus.
could drop you anywhere. You have no idea.
Yeah. So like I had an interview, I had a cafecito with the judge, and then I had an offer. So I ended up
That is
coming
amazing.
coming down here. And I had no intention of staying here. You know, I had a job offer back in New York. I thought I would go back to New York. I thought I would probably live most of my life there. And about halfway through my clerkship, I met my now wife, who, you know, she's born in Spain, but of Cuban sort of background. And try moving a Cuban woman with a big Cuban family in Miami out of Miami. Not happening, right? But I'm very thankful for it. So that's how I kind of ended up here in Miami. And so, you know, we've kind of, you know, as you mentioned, you know, we're kind of in a few different places now. So like I'm in Miami Beach. Most of our people are in New York. That's like what I would consider to be like our HQ. And
Sure.
then we've got another team in Chicago, you know, as you know. And so like I end up going to New York like every month, at least once, sometimes twice.
Sure.
Don't find myself in Chicago as much because about 3.5 years ago, I hired a CEO for the firm and he's there. So that's kind of, you know, can take care of that. And so it's really Miami and New York is like a big part of my life, although I'm randomly going to places like LA and Chicago where we have some clients too. And then you're absolutely right. So for like the last many years now in the summers, you know, we've been kind of taking the kids. I got two kids, a 13 and 7-year-old, both boys. And we end up going to Biarritz, which is just a fantastic coastal surf town in the southwest of France. So not the fancy south of France, but like the other side. And
How far from Marseille is that?
it's several hours, many
Several
hours.
Okay.
Yeah, it's closer to a couple hours from Provence. It's about a 4.5 hour train ride down from Paris. And it's just a really great, like, it's the French Basque. So it's on the French side of Basque country. So like
Amazing.
we're a 30-minute drive to San Sebastian. My wife's family, a lot of them are in the Basque region on the Spanish side down in Santander. So we kind of spend the summer kind of going just back and forth on all these little beach towns between Biarritz and Spain. And it's a lot of fun. It's great.
You know, I will tell you, if there is a cheat code in life, you found it. And I'm glad you brought up your wife, Carolina, because, you know, as I was kind of putting together some things that we would chat about, you know, I kept thinking about her because, and for our audience, and I'm going to let you tell the world who she is, but I remember I was sitting in Boulder, Colorado, and I texted you because my dad and I were watching CNN, and all of a sudden your wife is on our TV in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm just blown away. And then I had to tell my parents who she was and how I knew her. So we'll come back to that subject. But tell me about Jayaram Law. Like, give me the world of what you do in the law firm and then how you ended up doing stuff specific to the crypto industry.
Yeah, no, totally. So I mean, so I left Big Law like 2008-ish, 2009 actually it was. And I had this just crazy idea that in the height of the financial crisis, I should start a company. But you know, I was like, you remember, man. I mean, I was like 30 years old. You know, we were probably about the same age. I mean, didn't know a lot, but I did know that like the big law life was just not for me, right?
Sure.
Learned a lot, worked on a lot of big public things, as you probably did, as we all did back then. But I just didn't love the culture, and I was starting to see like firms like Fenwick and Wilson Sonsini and like you know, Cooley, some of these firms that were like kind of getting very niche into tech, right?
Sure.
And like that doesn't sound very earth-shattering today. Like those are all sort of household names in the legal industry now, but back then they were sort of like left of center, a little bit offbeat, doing things a little bit differently. And I wasn't going to like necessarily commit my life to being a tech lawyer, but I did have some very strong opinions about like what I thought legal service should be like, right? And I also really wanted to do whatever I could do, Cubs, to like spend my life working with the most creative people I could find. That was really the initial vision of the practice.
I know that's a theme of who you are. Where does that come from?
Yeah, so that, you know, it probably comes from just like my whole childhood, my youth. I mean, I've been playing music for most of my life. I was like, you know, probably one of the only Indian kids in my high school, but I was like, always the Desi playing in all like the indie rock bands and stuff like that. So, we do the Battle of the Bands. And then as I got a little bit older, like later into my teens, we played shows in the city and stuff like that too. And, I was one of these guys that like, I kind of kept it up when I got to college because the guys that I played with in high school, to be honest with you, Cubs, all of them except me made a career of music and,
Wow.
and are still doing it today. Right.
And where did you grow up exactly?
We're just outside Chicago. It's the suburbs of Chicago on the western suburb. And then, so like it was like the late 80s, early 90s, like in Chicago, I mean, you had Smashing Pumpkins, Wilco, yeah, and I was very into like alternative rock and, Nirvana and Soundgarden and all this kind of stuff. And so I played music a lot. Then in college, I was an athlete for a year, and so I had some athlete friends, but I also had like a whole group of creative friends. Like I always continued playing music and screwing around and stuff. And when I moved out to New York, I kind of kept on that path a little bit, and I just felt like my life was again very full of creative people. And I feel like when I got into the practice of law, because as man, I mean, you spend so much time, right?
Sure.
Especially in those early years, trying to learn the craft and get your hours and impress the partners and the clients and all that stuff. And I really feel like I got away from that for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and I was missing it. If you want, with a little, I didn't know this at the time, but it was a little bit of reflection now, 16 years later, I really feel like that's what I felt was missing. And so I'm like, okay, let me go start something where I could just work with creative people. And I don't know that I exactly knew what that meant, but I did know a few things. One, it wasn't just that I wanted to represent creative clients. That was a part of it. I also wanted to hire people who I thought just sort of thought of things a little bit outside the box, or were sort of interested in just like the creative industries. It's just, I really loved seeing you get so into and so passionate about crypto and blockchain, right?
Sure.
So it was just, and you probably can't try to explain how and why that happened, but there's probably also some elements of that just you can't really explain. It's just you really felt passionate about it when you kind of engaged with it and learned more about it. And that's kind of how I felt about this vision, right? This very tiny vision of like, okay, creative, right? And so that was it. And so, I didn't want to be, though, very importantly, I never thought of myself as wanting to build like an entertainment law firm. Like that didn't speak to me at all.
Yeah.
What I really was seeing was this, right? Which is like in 2008, 2009, I was friends with a lot of like, arts people, maybe music people, fashion people, stuff like that, but also a lot of like tech founders. And if you remember back then, right, like tech founders and artists were kind of in the same room, right? These were all just creative people
Sure.
who were trying to change the world through some kind of expression, right? And I believe that, probably the 2010s at some point marked maybe a little bit of a transformation of that philosophy, because I do think that like tech went from Soho to Wall Street in like the 2010s, and maybe lost a little bit of that, right? Where now everyone was so fixated on valuations, how big of a SaaS company can we build over and over and over again, kind of thing. And so, I don't mean like everybody, but back then it was different. If you remember when we graduated law school, when we started practicing, tech founders would not be out of place finding themselves in a room full of artists or fashion people or something like that, right? It seemed to be a little bit of a creative pursuit. So I didn't want to be entertainment. I just wanted to be working with like people who were kind of had this like creative or innovation kind of focus, right? And so that's kind of like, how I started. And I'm an IP lawyer, as litigator. So I was doing IP litigation, commercial litigation, probably taking.
Let me pin you down there, because a lot of what we try to do on the podcast is we gear this to entrepreneurs, young professionals, young lawyers, young bankers, young anything, starting something out. Now, you're talking about like a lot of art and startup stuff. All I hear is people who have no money.
Yep.
And so when you were starting your law firm, how did you make it pay your bills?
Yeah. I'll give you the like honest truth. So I had saved $19,000 from my big law job. So I had $19,000, and I got my buddy. I was telling you about my high school band. I got my guitarist, who is also a great artist and like UX-y kind of guy. He built my website for me. Thank you, Greg Dressel out there.
Nice shout out. Nice shout
Yeah,
out.
yeah. And he also designed my wedding invitation the same year. So double thanks to you, Greg. But
Greg, we'll be in touch, and we'll get everybody his number and his contact information. All right, keep going.
But it was a combination of a few things, and this is important. I'm glad you asked that question because like a lot of people may just look at it and be like, oh my gosh, he must have just started representing like LVMH on day 2 or something like that. And it's like, no, absolutely not. So I did 2 things to keep the lights on. There was a lawyer who was a partner at Holland and Knight who I knew from when I was an intern at Holland and Knight as a high school and then college student running filings before electronic filing days. I would, run around the Chicago Loop and file things in the courthouse. And I would be a sweaty mess by 4:30 in the afternoon because it would just be court runs all day, right?
That's amazing.
There was a partner there who really liked me, and he had left Holland and Knight, and he started the only kind of boutique. I've never seen a boutique practice like this. He was a solo practitioner who did half antitrust law, because super smart guy, and the other half was a divorce lawyer. So
wow.
He was like, well, I'm drowning in work. You started your firm. You probably have no clients. Do you want to help me with some stuff? And I was like, sure. So he paid me, and I would make sure that, and the cool thing about that was it doubled his office space because he would have me work in his office. I'm like, oh, this is great. And he knew I was trying to build my own thing. He's like, I don't care what you do. Just get my shit done. Right.
That's amazing.
And I did. And I would run to court for him. I ended up in child custody hearings. I would end up in federal court, antitrust summary judgment hearings, like all kinds of crazy stuff. And so that was one thing. And then the second thing, which ended up going a little bit longer, was another one of those Holland and Knight partners, a guy named Bob Queenie, who's a fantastic guy. And he had a very interesting trade secret patent and shareholder case that he brought, out of Holland on his own. He had a bit of a, you could probably go read about it, explosive separation, shall we say?
Sure.
And so he went on his own, and it was a pretty interesting big case. And he brought me onto that case to kind of run it with him because he needed resources. He was on his own. And that case, Kubs, went up and down to the Seventh Circuit, I think 3 times in the 2010s.
Wow.
And that kept it busy. So once you got a couple things going, that was like my sort of meal ticket to like paying rent and convincing my newlywed wife that like I actually had a law practice.
Like there's something to it.
I was doing something. And then I was running around, I was talking to every artist I could find, all my friends, anybody starting a business. I relied a lot on the Indian community, which I've been very sort of involved in Chicago since I was a very young child, my temple community and stuff. And listen, I mean, you know how it is. You went through it too. And like before you knew it, here's the thing I would say to like entrepreneurs or anybody, right? I wasn't making a lot of money and I wasn't like, making headlines or anything, but I was staying busy and I felt busy. And as you feel busy, as any kind of entrepreneur, then you start to gain confidence because you're not twiddling your thumbs. And I think that mix of confidence and sort of just accomplishing tasks, those 2 things together, I think are the fuel that really can get an early stage entrepreneur through some very, very, very challenging times. And
I will tell you, I'm writing that down because I think that is an amazing lesson. And at some point, I'm going to do a podcast just on looking back at what we learned from everybody that came on. And that is an amazing lesson. So for the audience, I always try to make this contrast. You started, we heard what you were doing back then, how you were bouncing around, doing work for others, partnering on different things. Just to impress everybody, how many lawyers are you now? How many offices? And tell us kind of where you sit now.
Yeah. So now we've got like, say 35 people, say half of those are lawyers, between New York, Chicago and Miami. And, we're working for, a whole bunch of brands and companies that you all know, really groundbreaking artists too. And, fashion brands, other kinds of creative people, tech companies, entrepreneurs, all kinds of just weird conceptual groups of people doing interesting things like Mischief, all this like it's a really very, very unique mix of clients. And one interesting thing too is that like the bigger brands that I work with, they love to like interact and interface with like the emerging artists and stuff that I work with. They think that's very unique and interesting too. So we've also been able to cultivate probably the thing I'm most sort of just grateful for. We've cultivated a really great community, and we're bringing that community together pretty often, both New York and in Miami. And yeah, no, that's like we've definitely come a long way from those.
You came out of law school in '04.
Oh, four, yeah.
So just to put some numbers on what we just heard, came out in '04, started the law firm around
Oh,
like
nine.
2009, started with one lawyer. Now, 17, 18 lawyers, 35 people, three different offices representing some of the biggest brands in the country. For those young lawyers, this is the example of what you can do with a law degree if you kind of you tell me, think about it creatively, try to do something different, try to
Yeah.
kind of get away from the norms of how things are done and try to innovate. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, listen, absolutely. And listen, one other thing I add to that, Cubs, is, I went to Wisconsin. I went to Cardozo, right? Like the doors weren't necessarily open in 2009 when I was getting
Sure.
started, right? So and I'm a brown guy too. So there you go. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that it would have been a lot easier for me to stay at Greenberg or just kind of go in that path. But I think what I can say now with much more clarity than the young 30-year-old, the 29-year-old, back then, is it was really a gift to do this, right? Because at the end of the day, one thing I've learned at least is, this idea of authenticity, we hear it everywhere. It feels cliche. It probably sounds cliche even when I said it just now, but there's something very real to that, right? I could have been noodling in big law probably for another 16 years and be talking to you now, saying, oh yeah, I'm like a partner in the crypto group at wherever,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
But that wouldn't have been me, and I wouldn't have been talking to you. You wouldn't have wanted to talk to me because I would have never reached anywhere near my potential because I would have been doing something that I really wasn't passionate about, right? When I started this, I left the big paycheck. I thought there was no paycheck. I was just doing this to be happier, right?
Yeah.
To be more fulfilling. But what I realized along the way is when you can really sort of find that thing that really moves you, right? That's actually the thing that's going to make you sort of just successful, whatever your definition of that is. It could be economic, it could be just otherwise, right? Like doing really great work or collaborating with all people that you respect and want to work with. And I think that's like truly because you can't really sort of perform at that level until and unless you kind of find that thing that really drives you. And it's so true because you're right. The kinds of things I was trying to do were not historically lucrative. Artists, fashion people, like creative people, right? But if you're that passionate about it, you are going to work as hard as you need to work, and you're going to sort of you're going to be willing to figure out how to make it work in the way you want to make it work because you love it, right? And I think that's like an important lesson I learned along the way.
I have a note here, and it says, "Don't let Vivek give himself too much credit." Talk to us about who Carolina is, because there's always somebody behind a successful person, and I have a feeling that Carolina played a large role in your life. So tell us a little bit about her and what she's doing, and why I'm seeing her on CNN in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah. You are, by the way, 110% right about this. I would definitely not be here, and who knows, I still might be kicking around in family court in Chicago if it weren't for her. But she's amazing. She right now she's the CEO of the Elevate Prize Foundation. But for the last 25 years, she has really given her life to the sort of nonprofit and foundation world. And there's so much I could say about Carolina, but I'll say one thing, which probably will contextualize or summarize what you're trying to get at. She's the only person I know who has always been the boss. Always. Always. She graduated from my University of Miami Law School in 2003. And while she was in law school, she started an organization called Legal Art. And for those people in Miami, it became
Everybody in Miami knows what that is. Yeah.
Everyone knows it. It became a legendary nonprofit that gave pro bono legal services in exchange for artwork. So if you're an artist, starving artist, not working artist, successful artist, doesn't matter. If you need legal help and you maybe can't afford it or whatever, you can get that help you need bartering for art. It was a very unique kind of thing, and it was cool. So she did that. And through the next 15 years, so she was obviously the boss of one there, and she built a small team there. But just over the next 15 years, she went on to lead larger and larger and larger arts organizations until she made a total pivot in 2019. And with Joe Deitch, who's sort of the primary donor for Elevate, they together started a really great social impact fund called the Elevate Prize Foundation, which gives all kinds of support and training to social impact entrepreneurs, like the best social impact entrepreneurs making the sort of biggest impact all over the world. And you guys should go check it out. Their tagline is "Make Good Famous," and they really have done a really unbelievable job over the last 6 years. It's only been 6 years, and they have like really catapulted to really, to do some really great things. And so you're absolutely right, Cubs. She is the reason you saw her, I think, on CNN is because the CNN Heroes now is basically CNN and Elevate. So they do the heroes together. And so she was on the stage with Anderson Cooper, and she's been doing that now for a few years with him. And no, you're absolutely right, though. She is somebody that believed in me from the beginning. Maybe when others thought, like, what is he thinking of doing with like this weird creative law thing? And he's like, and he's got no money, got no clients. She said, no, I think he could do it. And so she always kind of supported me, maybe gave me this little false sense of confidence in those early years, which is also helpful. And then I will say now, like, it's really great. We don't technically work together, but we're such great collaborators. She's like definitely like a bit of a, she's my McKinsey whisperer on the side.
Well, listen, I will tell you, I'm a big fan of both of you. I love getting your newsletter. I love turning on, opening up social media and seeing what she's up to. Yeah. It's incredible. So we kind of got an idea of your artistic background here, and I want to bring it into the crypto world. Yeah. Tell us how you first got involved with digital art, NFT. Give us a, kind of a primer on what it is you were doing and then how that all came to be. And you told me a story that I want our audience to hear, which I thought was awesome.
Yeah, sure. So, when we hit the pandemic, I had worked with, a few blockchain startups, digital art blockchain startups, and people probably, minting NFTs, things like that, or trying to create online galleries on chain and things like that. But, as as well as anybody, I mean, nobody was funding that stuff, so it was like little sputtering startups here and there, right? But when the pandemic came, we at least had a little bit of that experience. So as we all know, and I'm sure all your listeners know, I mean, when 2020 and 21, that's really when blockchain really became sort of mainstream, right? Or at least gained a lot more exposure, publicly. And so early in the pandemic, I was working with an old friend of mine named Nicole McGraw, who's actually now the ambassador to Croatia.
Wow.
She had an art gallery up in Palm Beach, and she called me up one day and she goes, "Listen, I'm going to close my gallery, my physical gallery, which was already closed, I guess, because we were in lockdown." But she said, I'm not going to reopen, and I'm going to go into business with one of my artists, a guy named Brendan Murphy. And I knew Brendan's art, and he makes these kind of spaceman-ish kind of sculptures. And I was like, oh, wow, really? I was a little bit surprised, to be honest, because Nicole was a successful gallerist, and the gallery was, somewhat known, at least in Palm Beach. But I also knew she's very smart and capable and talented. And so I was also a little bit intrigued by that. So we worked with her, on like forming the company. And the idea for the company was she wanted to really form an NFT project, right? With Brendan. And so, we do the docs and give them the IP advice, and we're looking at things, we're drafting terms and conditions, like all this kind of stuff. And one day I'm just sitting in bed, I think this was like in 2021. And she, I just get a text from her, and it just says like 17 million bucks. And I'm like, what is she talking about? And I texted her back, and then of course I looked online. I think there was already a Yahoo article up or something. And at the time that it launched, it was the Bungie project, which was the highest sort of valued NFT project at the time. Now this was early on, like the punks and Bored Apes and everything ended up sort of superseding all that by quite a bit. But it was a little bit of a moment, and that kind of brought me into conversations with other NFT projects, with other entrepreneurs who were trying to build arty things sort of on chain. And then ultimately also brought us in with like a lot of the bigger brands who were trying to figure out initially maybe like, hey, how does ownership work, and how do we enforce things? How do we enforce our IP on chain? Is it different? What are the differences? How do you do it? All that kind of stuff. And so, but that Bungie project was a kind of an early thing that brought us into it. But listen, I mean, I think during the height of that pandemic, after right around that time, I was representing all kinds of artists and founders who were kind of like, on the front lines, I guess, like you could say, of like the crypto boom, right? Like we helped every realm, for example, close like I think a $125 million round. It's like this big metaverse company that's now doing like video game development.
Sure.
We were guiding, Daniel Arsham, arguably one of the world's, most well-known sort of living artists. He decided that he wanted to do sort of this like Web3-ish kind of like moving time-based digital sculpture. So we kind of, helped him with that, right? And then, like I said,
are you still seeing some of this go now? I will tell you, man. During that time, we too were getting these phone calls. We got a call from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's people because they wanted to explore the world of NFTs. But my question to you is, okay, fast forward, we're post-pandemic now, new world of crypto, right? Since January 20th. Are you still seeing NFTs and digital art becoming a thing, or is it subsiding?
Here's what I will say about that. Digital art, absolutely. My personal belief, right? I think that the NFT boom of like the pandemic really did sort of open up the pathway for digital artists. Okay, like I've been working with like guys like 6 and 5 and Andres Reisinger and like a whole bunch of them, right? And a lot of these artists are having success at auction. People like Rafiq Anadol. I mean, you got the most public work arguably one of the most public works in the country at MoMA, right? There's certainly been an increase in the making of and sort of buying and selling of.
Who's the market? Because an NFT is a unique thing. Crypto is a unique thing. And
Right.
only a small subset of people can really understand it, can really engage. So talk to me about the market for this. Just in case any of our listeners are thinking, you know what, I want to go into this space. I want to kind of feel it out. Who are the buyers? How do you find them? And what is motivating those buyers?
Yeah. So I'll put it like this. There are basically still two camps, right? They used to be like, if I could go off screen, very far apart.
Sure.
Now they're getting kind of closer. Okay. So in the pandemic, there was the art world and then there was like the NFT world, right? They were not connected.
They didn't mesh. Okay, got it.
Art world, right? Which is like, say, the MoMAs, the Guggenheims, the Whitneys, the Pam Art Museum here in Miami, right? Like, I mean, the art world, the people who read Art Forum, like, the sort of art world, capital A, capital W. In comes NFT artists, creators, and this ecosystem, the buyers and everybody, right? These stayed very separate. And there was actually, if you remember, like Art Basel 2022, I believe is when it was 21, 22, when it was like everyone all the crypto people descended on Miami for the first time.
And they didn't leave. And they didn't leave.
Well, that's kind of subsided. And what's kind of I've seen now in the last 3 years, digital art definitely up, right?
Sure.
Now, of those digital artist Cubs, I think many of them are deciding to, build on chain and others are not. Right. And I think the sort of fact that that's not the focus anymore is kind of cool because I think what's happening is I think collectors, right? Whereas it used to be like, oh, do you collect NFTs or not? Right. It's like that. Whereas it's just, and it's not
another medium. It's another medium. Is that what you're saying?
It's just another, and it's like, do you collect art or not? Yeah, I do. Oh, yeah. I really like that digital work. Oh, well, you need a wallet for that because that one's on chain. Oh, okay, cool. Right. It's like,
how do you display it? Like, so and this may sound like a kind of a naive question, but a lot of people that collect art, they do so for the purposes of putting it in their home, their vacation home, a gallery, an office, or whatever it is. How does that work with digital art? And I'm kind of leading you into your office because I've seen pictures of your office, and I want to kind of understand.
Man, this guy's good. But
is that what they're doing with it? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So, I mean, historically or traditionally, historically being a few years, but like the artists almost always were using just like LG and Samsung screens, right? Sure. And like nothing wrong with that. Like the really good ones, they're high def and it's pretty good. But I think where you're getting with that, which is I think is a really good question, is in our Miami space, we have a 40-foot by 8-foot screen created by this guy Alex Samore, who is the founder of a company called Artbox. Alex is a Parisian guy. He owns a gallery in Barcelona called Load Gallery. And
Okay.
his gallery is all digital artworks, right? All digital artists. And if your audience would, if they find themselves in Barcelona this summer, definitely stop by there because your audience specifically would probably really love seeing the stuff there. But about 10 years ago, he fell into a group of digital artists in Paris, and he noticed that they were just really, to your question, showing things on like their Mac screen or like
Yeah.
maybe on like an LG or something like that, right? And he thought that that was like a bit of a travesty. And he was like an electronics like tinkerer. He would go to these used electronics markets in Singapore and Hong Kong and China, and he would build motherboards. He would build flat screen TVs, and he ultimately decided to build the Art Box, which is one we have is giant, 40 feet by 8 feet, but he makes all different sizes. And these things are made to exhibit digital art. And we're involved, and he's also a client of mine. And there's a couple deals that I can't talk about exactly right now, but I can say to you, I do believe that the Art Box is going to end up becoming sort of a bit of an industry standard, with this, because it really is meant for digital art, and you can really tell the difference. As you've seen in the office, I mean, a 40-foot screen, even at close distance, it looks really crisp and sharp. And I think that those kind of accoutrement to help the digital art
I think
world
that's awesome.
have just never been there. And I feel like now that's all getting built. And so all of this, I think, is very promising for the NFT market. That said, it's not like we're seeing tons of NFT activity necessarily right now, but I do think that the boom we had, plus change in administration and just general direction of culture, probably means we're going to be seeing a lot more digital art. And I think a lot of it will end up on chain.
Well, I'll tell you what, is just put a bookmark in that, because when those deals you're working on go public, we're going to get you back on.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So where is this going? You were kind of an oracle. You know this industry well. You know the art world. You know the digital space. You know the legal regulatory landscape. Give me some predictions. What are we going to see in this space in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think you're going to see. I think you're going to see a pretty wide acceptance of digital art as a real workable medium in the art world. Now, it won't be like a fringe thing. It won't be a crypto thing. It'll just be a thing. But I think that will ultimately bring, I think, more like crypto and blockchain people probably into the art world. And I think our sort of collective canvas, if you will, of consumers, right, will end up interfacing more with digital art than we ever have, right? A couple data points on this is there was just a very successful Sotheby's auction that was all AI art. 5 years ago, Cubs, if I went to anybody at Sotheby's and said, "Hey, I've got a great idea for you," and I said that,
They just laugh. Yeah.
that comment, I would be laughed at. I'd probably get blacklisted.
Yeah.
Don't deal with Jayaram. This guy's crazy. He's gone to Burning Man one too many times or something, right? I think that is from in the world that I'm in, that's a big move, because I'll be honest with you, that was something that I think a lot of people thought would never happen, right? So
Are you seeing it? Are you seeing digital art creep into Art Basel? I wasn't there this last year, but was there a big showing, like a big presence of new age art or digital art?
Yeah, so I'll just give you, so for the last 4 years, we've been curating and producing exhibitions in Miami for Art Basel, and we've done shows with Daniel Arsham. 2 years ago, we did the show Making Miami, which was 50 Miami artists, like Friends with You and Jen Stark and Hernan Bass, all these big names from back in the day in Miami. And this last year, we were approached by some really unbelievable digital artists from the Netherlands, Studio Drift. And they came in and they did a complete digital show in our space on that Art Box screen and then on a couple other screens. It was super well attended. People loved it. And yeah, I think I absolutely. I mean, I walked through the fair this year. I think, to answer your question, that it's a really good one, because I think in the next 5 years, you'll just be going through an art fair like that. And, it may not be as ubiquitous as painting and sculpture, but it won't be far off. You know what I mean?
So let me ask you something. So, coming back, we've got a good feel for digital art, got a good feel for where you've come from, your law firm, and what you've built, which is incredibly impressive and something I really take a lot of joy in seeing its growth. But let me ask you something. Where are you going from here? Where are you at, and you personally, where's your law firm going? And I just kind of want to understand, how you think about the future for you and your enterprise.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think at this moment that you asked this question, I personally think there's really only one way to answer this, which is for us, it's technology. So we spent the last 3 years. About 3 years ago, I ended up hiring our first CEO, which is
Sure.
Noah Ornstein. Noah, really quick background on him, which is interesting, leads into the future here, is he did a JD and then an MBA at Columbia when they were not together. So he spent a lot of time there. And then when he left, instead of going to a firm or a clerkship or anything, he started a startup in 2005, trying to create the first AI lawyer in New York.
Yeah.
He was enjoined by the state of New York for unauthorized practice of law. He appealed, he won, he got funded, and unfortunately, his lead investor was Bear Stearns. So that came crashing down in 2009. He went to Kirkland & Ellis. He became a restructuring partner there. And now he's joined us and is sort of leading our company, but also the sort of technology vertical. And so we've developed two products in the last 3 years. One is an enterprise product that tracks third-party software licenses that your company might be using, all the old stuff from MS Office and Adobe to like the newer OpenAI, Midjourney, DALL-E 2, all that stuff. And it lets you know when there's a change in terms, tells you in very plain English what the change in terms are, what the impact is, how to opt out, blah, 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 like does all that kind of stuff. So it's an enterprise solution.
Cool tool. Yeah, it's a cool tool.
And then we've got a trademark search and clearance, product that we've developed. And there's a third product, an art product for artists actually, that we're also developing. And I think that products like this that can replace very sort of necessary legal tasks, but using technology to like work in the same workflow as lawyers and like solve those things. I think that's definitely the future combined with AI, right? So I'm sure you're using, you've used, I'm sure, or using ChatGPT and other things.
All the time, yeah.
It's incredible, right? And so
yeah,
I'm assuming we probably have similar views on this, Cubs, but like, I just can't see why you'd need 3,000 lawyers, 2,000 lawyers in a law firm. I don't understand how people are going to be billing hourly. I don't know why clients will pay $1,000 for a new law grad to write some emails or review a memo or do some case law research or whatever. It's all that stuff just seems I think you said it earlier when you said, I've heard you say earlier, that maybe lawyers aren't the best sort of judges of technology, right?
Yeah.
And it's so true. But I think, somehow lawyers are the only remaining industry that have somehow, with the 2006 Congress amendments to the ESI stuff notwithstanding, we've kind of stayed immune to technology over the last 30 years.
I actually have a theory about that. I was having the same conversation with a friend, and my theory is that, if you said, Cubs, what do you do as a lawyer? My response is, there's some practice of law, as you've seen when we work together, but there's a lot of psychology to it. It's almost like when you're dealing with clients who have problems or clients that are trying to grow something, that there is this kind of sounding board type feel. There is this kind of, crutch type feel. They use the lawyer as the crutch when they're worried or when they're stressed. And I think that's probably why, up till now, and I certainly don't think this is going to last indefinitely, but I think up till now, those kind of aspects of the practice of law have led to lawyers staying fairly immune from the advances in technology. I do think it's going to fall. Listen, we do a segment at the end here. I know you and I could sit here and do this all day, and I promise you, next time I'm in Miami, we'll grab a drink and we'll keep this going.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of the people that have really taken to the podcast, they love learning about what you've done, as you've said, and what interests you and where you're going. But what they're kind of, I think, most interested in is how you think. So I'm going to give you a lightning round of like 5 or 6 questions.
I love this. All right.
And I'd like to just kind of give me your initial thoughts. Don't elaborate too much.
Okay.
But I just kind of want to know how you think about things.
Okay.
You have 2 hours in Miami to spend and do whatever you want. What are you doing?
Beach.
Just sitting on the beach, hanging out, swimming. What are you doing?
Yeah, just between the beach and the ocean. I think Miami is many things, but at the end of the day, our treasure, the thing that makes us us, is the real sort of Caribbean and tropical vibe, right? So like, I just think the beach, the ocean, And maybe I'd stop over at Las Olas down on Euclid and grab myself some Cuban food at the end of
Nice,
a
nice.
few hours on maybe an hour and 45 minutes on the beach and 15 minutes for a quick bite to eat at a Cuban spot.
There you go. What is your favorite moment each day?
Oh, um, my favorite moment each day. Um, I've got two kids, and we're Cubs, we're all busy, but we have really made it. Not every moment, not every day, but I would say 80, 90% of the day, and 100% of the days where we're not traveling. My wife and I get in the car at about 7:25, and we take them each to school, and that's literally the hour that the four of us are together almost every day. And that's a kind of a guarantee. And it's just fun and it's nice. And we listen to music and we do a little karaoke-ing and like it's a beautiful part of the day.
It's funny. We have this kind of thematic thing that happens on the show. We bring people and we ask them that same question. And we have gotten different derivatives of the same answer for that question. I would say that it's kind of split 50-50. Half the people talk about like this moment in the evening when dinner's over and homework's done and you have like a short 1 hour time span with just you, your kids, your family, your dog, and your home, that quiet time that everybody talks about. And then I would say half are kind of fall into your camp where they love this moment in the morning before everybody goes off into the
Yeah.
world. So I'm going to chalk you down as a morning person.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely am. Yeah, I'm an early riser, like yoga running kind of guy. Like I love the
Nice.
morning. I'm after 9, I could text you back, but I'm probably not going to call you back.
What's your yoga studio in Miami? Let's plug them.
All right, so Moto Yoga, hot yoga with Paul every Tuesday and Thursday, but I have to also plug Maylen Dominguez Saturday morning, Ahana Yoga, Design District, 9 o'clock. It's a great class.
Ahana Yoga, man. I will tell you, one of the things that I do if I had 2 hours free is just go through Ahana Yoga's social media. Because I just think like it is so fun to watch what they're up to. And they
Totally.
have a world of people doing yoga
Yes.
with the founder at the top directing
John,
them. It's kind
yeah.
of awesome to see.
Yeah.
My next question is kind of it's a tough one, I think. If you could have a wish, and that wish is going to come true tomorrow, what is it?
I think it's that people treat each other kindly. I think
Elaborate on that. Like, where does that come from?
I think that this moment right now, and it's probably at all times, but maybe it's also the just you know as we get older, and as you have really realized in a data-driven way on this show about the things that are really important, right? Nobody's saying, "Oh, the best part of my day is when I close that deal," or when the judge
Sure.
rules in my favor, or when I look at my bank account and it's higher than it's ever been. Nobody's saying that, right? We as humans are truly here to like just really love, right? And build community and love each other and treat each other well. And I think that if we could just learn to be a little less polarizing and a little bit kinder to each other, we can probably start to take some steps to reduce the amount of suffering in this world. There's no need to have the level and degree of suffering that we all see it, right? And we
Yeah.
all may have different theories about why it's happening, and that's what's separating us. But we know it's there. And I think a big first step to trying to figure out how to like as a global community to like address a lot of the suffering, I really think a lot of it just comes with just trying to sort of you know release the ego a little bit and like just kind of try to extend some kindness to the other humans who we encounter throughout the day.
And this next question, and this wasn't planned at all, might be a segue off that answer. But one of the things that, I always kind of bring up, and I'm not going to force you to like say anything political, but, in this world, obviously our country is pretty divided right now.
Yeah.
So if all of a sudden, you were the leader of our country in some fashion or form, whether it's the leader of enterprise, whether it's the president of the United States, whether it's, somebody out of Hollywood who's a lot of influence or a tech magnate that has a lot of influence, how would you go about breaching the divide in our country?
I think one of the big problems here in the United States is that our core value is money. That's the core value. right? And I'm an optimist, so I don't think that that's immovable. Although many people who I say that to say, well, that's the core value the country was founded on. Um, I don't know that that's the case. I tend to think that like if we could try to sort of shift our core values into values that are a little bit more about building community and sort of making sure our 400 million folks here have the basic things they need. I actually think those who want the core value to be money will actually probably end up becoming more successful, right? But that would be one of my very first sort of areas to focus on. And I know a lot of people listening might be saying, "Oh, this sounds very like Pollyanna. It sounds very like idealistic, like
Bernie Sanders.
this guy doesn't know what he's talking about." But I do think that a government is not a company, right? Companies' core value should be to maximize shareholder value. That is what it is, and that's the country we live in, and we live in a capitalist country, right? Or system. But I think government's role should be slightly different, and it should be more of like sort of looking after the people, right? And I don't know that money and making the most of it should be sort of the thing that is being sort of advanced by the government or supported by the government, right? Obviously, there are a lot of benefits to being the wealthiest nation in the world, right? And so to some degree, it is helpful. But I do think, and I really don't mean this politically at all. Even if you mentioned Bernie, like I like Bernie Sanders, he's just fine. But I think he's got a lot of things I agree with, maybe some things I don't agree with. But I do think that there is enough here for everybody to thrive. There really is.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that is maybe one thing I would focus on early on.
It's funny, and we'll come back to that on another episode, but that concept of enough seems to be a ringing theme throughout our podcast. Like, when is it enough? What is enough, and how does that work? Second to last question. Okay. What's your biggest fear?
Oh, biggest fear. Well, this isn't it. Caroline and I were talking about this morning, actually, Cubs, is like, I'm 46, she's 50. We are like super lucky. We have all four parents, like her two parents and mine, still here. And I don't have like any active fear of like being alone necessarily. But I think the two things I think about, I'm very curious how I will feel when my parents are no longer here. I'll just say that. I'm sure,
something all of people our age are dealing with right now.
Totally. Now, the thing about death for me is like I've like been a pretty deeply spiritual person my whole life, and we were raised Hindu, and I'm still consider myself Hindu and believe in reincarnation, rebirth, and all that. So I don't have a fear of death, but perhaps the fear of either being alone or of course, and I think any parent would probably say this at the top of their list, just any kind of suffering for your children, which I think is just a very difficult thing as a parent to think about, right? And so I'm just grateful that I've got two healthy kids right now, but like it's a long life and there's a long road ahead,
That's awesome. All right, so back to the thematic here. This is the one that I get the most feedback on. What is your advice, small piece of advice, young entrepreneurs, young lawyers, young people trying to do something, young artists for you? What is a small piece of advice to help them realize their goals?
Find something you really enjoy, that you really are passionate about, right? That seems simple enough. But then here's where people tend to sort of meander. When you find that thing, right? First of all, make sure it's something that's like you're honest about, authentic about, real about, right? It's got to be something you're really passionate about. But once you find that thing, stick with it for a long, long, long period of time. There's so much in our there's literally a word for it now, the hype cycle, right? Which is just kind of crazy, but there's just so much chatter. Every other LinkedIn post, someone's telling you how to build the law firm of your dreams in 30 days. And like someone else is telling you how to get rich quick on baby boomers retiring through an M&A scheme in the next 2 years, right? That's maybe people have done this, but there are billions of people, so the likelihood of you being that needle in the haystack is very low. In my experience, and this is not based on me. This is based on like the clients I've met, the people that I've met through my 46 years of life, the ones who I think have achieved some level of what, I think some objective level of success, right? In whatever it is they're doing. I think it's really a combination of those ingredients, which is finding something that you really are passionate about, because being at the top of your field and being successful is very hard. And because it's very hard, it takes a lot of effort and time. And if you are not passionate about it, you will not put in the effort and the time. So you just got to do that for the sheer hours and the hard work. But then you got to stick with it. I have had so many friends and clients do very interesting things, but because it's not popping off after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, they kind of give up, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with the society that we live in and the sort of messages that we're fed, right? So I think it's kind of like this thing about like, really sticking with it for a long period of time. And it really is true. One of the things that we all laugh at, but it's just so true, right? It only takes you like 15 years to become an overnight success, right?
Sure.
And that really is true, right? There's no get rich quick. There are no shortcuts. There's no magic, right? It's just these few things. And I think a lot of young entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs don't really hear that enough, because that's not a sexy message, right? That's not a very attractive message. And I think somebody like we hear Jensen Huang, talk a lot about Denny's and dishwasher and all this kind of stuff, which is very moving. But if you really dig into what he's talking about, I mean, that really is what it is. It's like it's just a long ass journey, and you just have to stay on the road, right?
I love that. I'm gonna highlight that. So just to summarize, find your passion and stick with it. When we bring a show to an end, the last segment we do here, and I've had the kind of the luck of being able to have worked with, in some fashion or form, often as clients, often as co-counsel, with the different people that come on the show. And what I try to do is extract a lesson that, a life lesson that I've learned from working with that particular person. And I thought about this last night. I said, I've known Vivek since 2006, right? And I said,
maybe even 2005, wasn't it 5? 5 or 6?
Maybe even 2005. So, so I sit there and I think, what is it that stands out to me? And I will tell you, it kind of hit me like a bolt of lightning last night. We all, especially you and I, we've kind of gone our own ways. We were working at big law. We started our own firms. We've engaged in other industries. We've often kind of stepped outside our role of lawyer to become like the executive or the founder or the co-partner, or the advisor, or whatever it is with other businesses. And I think what is kind of the thematic that I take from kind of watching you and then living my life is there is really something to just the friendships that are created in business. You and I, we've probably passed in the middle of the night 1,000 times. I see your name in different places. Even when you're not present, people mention your name and I say, oh, no, Vivek is a friend. And I think what I take from that is, we're probably to the point in our careers where, money doesn't wake us up every day. But I'll tell you, the friendships do. Yeah. And seeing other people succeed really has become a source of energy for me. And I love it when I get your newsletter. I love it when I interact with people that work for you. I worked with one of your associates in Chicago, and I think the world of her. And it was just kind of cool to see everything you're doing, then to see your wife doing what she's doing in this kind of crazy way. And I just thought, I'm deriving so much happiness from seeing him succeed. And I hope, the converse is true. And I think the lesson I want to kind of share is that you got to look for things from which you can kind of extract happiness and joy later on in life. And I'm sure it's kids and I'm sure it's family and all those things. But, enjoying the success of your friends, people that you've known a long time, is something that I am really focusing on. And I realize that it means a lot to me to see my friends succeed. And I think you are the symbol of that, man. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It was great having you. And I look forward to bringing you back in season 2 and talking about all the things that you've been up to. For our listeners, that is episode 8 of Adjacent Pod. I'm really excited about episode 9. We are bringing, crypto lawyer extraordinaire Aaron Brogan to the pod. This guy knows everything about the world of crypto. He gets pulled into a lot of different things. We have a lot to talk about with him. Vivek, thank you for joining. And I really can't wait to catch up over a drink.
Yeah. Great to see you, Cubs. Thank you.